He was 18 years old when his whole world fit into a trash bag. Daniel had $250, a little sister he couldn't save, and a weird inheritance, 3 acres of land for $7. Everyone said he was crazy to take it. 6 months later, he was in court fighting a corporation for $250,000. But here's the thing they didn't know, his grandfather had buried a secret under that land 35 years ago. And when Daniel found it, everything changed. This is his story. And if you've ever felt lost or had to fight for your future with nothing but hope and stubbornness, hit that subscribe button, because this one's for you. You know that feeling when you see someone's whole world fit into a single garbage bag? That's what happened on Daniel's 18th birthday. He stood outside the Pine Ridge Youth Home in rural Oregon, holding everything he owned, watching his little sister's face pressed against the window inside. Her name was Bella, and she was only 11 years old. That moment, watching him look at her through that glass, knowing he had to walk away, that's where this story really begins. Let me tell you about Daniel. He grew up in the system. His parents died in a car accident when he was 10. His grandfather had passed away just a year before that. For 8 years, Daniel and Bella moved through different foster homes, different schools, different beds. Then on his 18th birthday, the state handed him $250, a trash bag with his clothes, and told him good luck. But there was something else that day. Something nobody expected. Mrs. Patterson, his caseworker, gave him a thick envelope. Her voice was tired, flat, like she'd said these same words 1,000 times before. This is from the county legal office, Daniel. Your grandfather left you something in his will. Daniel stood there in the cold Oregon rain, water already soaking through his worn-out sneakers. Inside that building, Bella was crying. He could see her small hand on the window. They weren't allowed to say goodbye. The staff said it would be too emotional, too disruptive. So brother and sister just looked at each other through that glass, and if you'd been there, you would have seen a young man's heart break into pieces right there on those steps. The envelope got wet in his hands. He didn't open it until he reached the bus station, sitting on a hard plastic bench with his trash bag at his feet. The letter was from a lawyer he'd never heard of, someone named Mr. Harrison, from a small town in eastern Oregon Daniel couldn't even pronounce. Here's what it said: his grandfather, William Carter, had left him a piece of land. Not money, land. 3 acres of property in the middle of nowhere. And to claim it, all he had to do was show up in person and pay the back taxes. The total amount? $7. Daniel read that line 5 times. $7 for 3 acres of land. There had to be a mistake. Land doesn't cost $7. A burger and fries cost more than that. But attached to the letter was a grainy photocopy of a satellite image. You could see the property, a gray square surrounded by dark forest. And sitting right in the middle was a building. It looked like a long, curved metal tube, half buried in the ground. The letter called it a Quonset hut, some kind of military structure from decades ago. His first thought: this is garbage. This is some worthless piece of land his grandfather couldn't sell, so he dumped it on him. But then he thought about Bella. He thought about the promise he'd made to her a week earlier, whispered through that same window late at night. I'm going to get us a home, Bella. A real home. And then I'm coming back for you. With $250, he could maybe survive 2 weeks in the city before ending up in a shelter. Or he could take a $7 chance on a piece of land he'd never seen. He looked at the picture of his family in his bag. There was his grandfather in the background, a tall quiet man with kind eyes, holding cotton candy for baby Bella. William Carter was a carpenter, a man who built things with his hands. He smelled like wood shavings and coffee. He'd taught Daniel how to tie knots, how to read a map, how to be patient. He wasn't the kind of man who played mean jokes on people. The bus to the city was boarding. Daniel could hear them calling for passengers. That was the safe choice, the expected choice. But there was another bus on the other side of the station, heading east into the mountains, toward that lawyer's town. He stood up. His legs looked shaky, but he walked to the ticket counter and bought a one-way ticket east. It cost him $40. It was the craziest, most reckless thing he'd ever done in his life. And looking back now, it was the best decision he ever made. The bus ride took 6 hours. Daniel watched the landscape change through the rain-streaked window. The city disappeared. Strip malls and parking lots gave way to pine forests and hills. The other passengers were mostly older folks, ranchers and retirees with weathered faces. Nobody talked to him. He was just another kid with a garbage bag, invisible and forgettable. He called Bella from a rest stop. He wasn't supposed to, there was a 30-day no-contact rule, but he knew she'd be waiting by the pay phone in the hallway near her room. "Danny?" Her voice was small, scared. "It's me, Bells. Where are you? They said you left." "I'm on a bus. I'm going to see a piece of land Grandpa left us." "Land? Like with trees and stuff?" "Yeah, with trees. And it has a building on it. I'm going to fix it up and make it into a home for us." There was a long pause. You could hear her breathing, thinking. "Is it far away?" "Yeah, it's far. But Bells, listen to me. I'm going to make this work. I promise you. I'm going to build us a real home, and then I'm coming back for you." "I know," she whispered. "Be safe, Danny. You too, Bells. I love you. Love you too." The line went dead, and he stood there in the cold, holding that phone, feeling the weight of that promise settle on his shoulders like a mountain. That was the moment Daniel stopped being just another kid who aged out of the system. That was the moment he became someone fighting for something bigger than himself. And what happened next? Well, that's when this story gets really interesting. The lawyer's office was on Main Street in a town called Silverton. The whole place looked frozen in time, like somebody had built it in 1950 and just forgot to update it. Old brick buildings, faded signs, pickup trucks parked at angles along the curb. It was the kind of town where everybody knows everybody, and strangers stand out like neon signs. Mr. Harrison's office smelled like old books and lemon furniture polish. He was an elderly man with white hair and glasses that sat on the tip of his nose. When Daniel walked in with his trash bag, soaking wet from the rain, the lawyer looked at him over those glasses with an expression that was hard to read. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice raspy and dry. "You actually came." "I did," Daniel said. His voice sounded thin, young. He put 7 crumpled dollar bills on the polished wooden desk. Mr. Harrison slid a stack of papers toward him. "Sign here and here," he said, pointing with a bony finger. Daniel signed. His hand was shaking. His signature looked like a child's handwriting. Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair, which creaked like an old barn door. "Now, let me be straight with you, son. Your grandfather bought this land 35 years ago. It was cheap then, and it's not worth much more now. It has no road access, no well, no electricity, no plumbing. It's basically wilderness with an old surplus military hut on it. Then why did he leave it to me? Your grandfather was a sentimental man. Also a very private one. He never told me his reasons. He just made it very clear that on your 18th birthday, this land would be offered to you and only you for the cost of the back taxes." He paused, studying Daniel's face. "However," he continued, "there is another option. I received a call last week from a development company. They're buying up land in that area. They've offered $20,000 for your property. As is. $20,000. You could see Daniel's breath catch. That was life-changing money. That was a real apartment, a real start. That was a lawyer to fight for custody of Bella. It was the smart choice, the logical choice. But he thought about his grandfather, a man who built things that lasted, a man who didn't do anything without a reason. They've been very persistent, Mr. Harrison added. His tone made it sound like a warning. I'm not selling, Daniel heard himself say. The words came out before he'd even fully decided. But once he said them, they felt right. I want to see the land first. Something changed in Mr. Harrison's expression. Respect, maybe. Or surprise. Your grandfather would have liked that, he said quietly. He reached into his desk and pulled out a large, old-fashioned key. It was heavy, iron, covered in rust. This is for the padlock on the hut. And here, he unfolded a hand-drawn map on yellowed paper. These are your directions. The walk to the property took 2 hours. The instructions were simple: follow County Road 17 for 4 miles, turn onto a dirt path called Timber Trail, then hike through the woods until you find the property line marked by old stone walls. By the time Daniel found it, the sun was setting. The forest was thick with Douglas fir and pine, the ground soft with moss and old needles. And then, through the trees, he saw it. The Quonset hut. It was bigger than he'd imagined, and in much worse shape. It sat in a small clearing like some kind of beached metal whale. The curved corrugated walls were covered in rust, angry orange patches that looked like a disease. The 2 big doors at the front were dented and scarred. Weeds and small trees grew right up against it, like nature was trying to swallow it whole. You could see his heart sink. This wasn't a home. This was a wreck. A piece of junk in the middle of nowhere. He walked around the building slowly, the ground squishy under his feet. There were small grimy windows set high up in the walls, too high to see through. At the back, a crooked stovepipe pointed at the sky. The $20,000 offer echoed in his mind. He could still go back. He could take the money and run. Nobody would blame him. But he had the key. At the front doors, a thick chain was wrapped through the handles, held by a massive padlock crusted with rust. He slid the key in. It stuck. For a moment he thought it was the wrong key, that this whole thing was just a cruel joke. But he put his weight into it, turning hard, and there was a screech of metal on metal, then a solid click. The lock popped open. The chain fell away with a heavy clang that echoed through the silent forest. It took all his strength to pull one of the huge doors open. It groaned on its hinges, the sound like something waking up after a long sleep. He looked inside. The interior was massive and dark, a cavern of shadows. One beam of dusty evening light cut through the darkness from a crack in the roof, and in that single shaft of light, right in the center of the huge empty space, sat a wooden crate. Just sitting there. Waiting. It looked deliberate. Placed. Daniel left his trash bag by the door and walked toward it, his footsteps echoing on the cracked concrete floor. The crate was old, made of dark weathered wood with rope handles. There was no lid. He looked inside. And what he saw changed everything. The crate was filled with glass jars. Old-fashioned canning jars, sealed with wax, packed in straw. And every single jar was stuffed with cash. Daniel stood there staring at those jars for what felt like an hour but was probably only a minute. His brain couldn't process what he was seeing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. He picked up one of the jars with shaking hands. It was heavy, the glass cold against his palms. Inside, he could see tightly rolled bundles of bills, old 20s and 50s, held together with rubber bands that looked ready to crumble. He set it down and picked up another. Same thing. And another. All the same. His legs gave out and he sat down hard on the cold concrete floor. He pulled one bundle out, and the rubber band snapped immediately, sending bills scattering into his lap. He counted them with trembling fingers. $1,000 in a single bundle. There had to be 20 bundles in just that one jar. And he counted 12 jars in the crate. Do the math. He couldn't even think straight. This wasn't just money. This was a different life. This was Bella's future. He started to laugh, this strange choking sound that echoed off the curved metal walls. Then the laughter turned into crying. He cried for everything, for all the years in foster homes, for every cold morning waking up in a place that wasn't home, for Bella's face at that window, for his parents, and for this quiet, practical man who he barely remembered but who had somehow built this incredible gift for him. William Carter hadn't just left him land. He'd left him a chance. But when the crying finally stopped and he wiped his eyes, he noticed something else at the bottom of the crate, underneath the last layer of straw. It was a thick leather-bound journal, and on the cover in faded gold letters was his grandfather's name, William Carter. Daniel opened it with shaking hands. The first page wasn't a journal entry. It was a letter, written in neat, precise handwriting, the handwriting of a man who worked with his hands. It was addressed to him. Daniel. If you're reading this, it means you made it to 18. It means you were strong enough to get this far. And it means you didn't take the easy money when they offered it to you. I knew you wouldn't. You have your mother's heart and my stubbornness. That's a good combination. Reading those words was like hearing his grandfather's voice across the years, faint but real. This place probably doesn't look like much right now. The money is for you and Bella. It's everything I saved. I sold my house after your grandmother died and lived cheap for years. I wanted you both to have a foundation, something the world couldn't take away from you. But the money is the least important thing I'm leaving you, son. The most important thing is this land, this building. This is your home if you choose to make it one. The letter continued for 3 pages. William explained that he'd bought the land cheap because nobody wanted it, no road access, no utilities, stuck in the middle of nowhere. But he'd seen something others didn't. He wrote about development companies, even back then, trying to buy up land in the area for some big project. He knew they'd come back eventually. He knew they'd try to pressure Daniel. Don't let them bully you, Daniel. They'll try. They'll offer you money that sounds like a fortune. But what you have here is more valuable than their resort. You just have to find it. The last line was underlined twice. The foundation is everything. Look to the foundation. Daniel looked around at the cracked concrete floor beneath him. The foundation. What did he mean? He didn't have answers that night. He was exhausted, emotionally wrung out. He found some old canvas tarps in a corner and made a makeshift bed. He didn't touch the money again, he pushed the crate into a dark corner and covered it with another tarp. It felt dangerous, like a secret that could burn everything down. That first night was the coldest night of his life. The temperature dropped below freezing. The wind howled outside, and every gust sounded like the metal walls were going to peel away. He lay there in the dark, listening to the forest, to an owl hooting somewhere, to branches scraping against the roof. He was terrified. But it was a clean kind of fear, honest fear. Not the fear of a bully in a group home or a social worker's random decision. This was the fear of being small and alone in a big wilderness. And somehow, that felt more real, more right than anything he'd felt in years. When the sun came up, light streamed through the crack in the roof and filled the whole space with pale gold. Daniel woke up stiff and freezing but alive. And he knew what he had to do. He had to survive. He had to turn this metal shell into a home. He took $100 bill from the jars. It felt like stealing and like using what was his all at the same time, and he hiked back into town. In the daylight, Silverton looked less forgotten and more patient, like it was waiting for something. He found the hardware store, a place that smelled like oil and sawdust. An old man with a weathered, friendly face watched him wander the aisles, completely lost. "Need some help, son?" he asked. Daniel told him a half-truth, that he was fixing up an old place, camping out for a while. He didn't mention the inheritance or the money. The man nodded, didn't press for details. Small-town people, Daniel was learning, respected privacy. His name was Frank, and he helped Daniel pick out what he needed. A good axe, a saw, heavy tarps to patch the roof, buckets for water, a camp stove, a real sleeping bag. He gave him a discount, called it a "welcome to the neighborhood" deal. Daniel bought simple food at the market, canned soup, bread, peanut butter, coffee. Things that felt like luxuries after years of institutional meals. The walk back, loaded down with supplies, was brutal. But every step felt purposeful. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something. The next month was the hardest work of Daniel's life. Every single day, from sunrise to sunset, he worked on that hut. He patched the hole in the roof, climbing up the curved metal surface with a rope tied around his waist, terrified he'd slip and break his neck. He cleared all the weeds and small trees growing around the building. He found a stream about a quarter-mile away, and he hauled water back in buckets until his shoulders ached and his hands were covered in blisters. He learned how to chop wood. He learned how to start a fire. He learned how to make do with almost nothing. In the back of the hut, he found an old wood-burning stove, rusted but solid. He spent 2 days cleaning it, scrubbing away years of rust and grime. He ran a new pipe through the old stovepipe hole in the roof. And the first night he lit a fire in it, the warmth that spread through that massive space felt like a miracle. It pushed back the cold, the dampness, the darkness. It made the hut feel less like a metal can and more like shelter. He called Bella every few days from the pay phone in town. He told her about the work, about the stove, about the forest. He didn't tell her about the money. That secret was too big, too dangerous to speak out loud over a phone line. But she could hear something different in his voice. "You sound different, Danny," she said one evening. "How?" "I don't know. Stronger. Less scared." "I'm still scared, Bells. But it's a different kind of scared now." "Good scared?" "Yeah. Good scared." 1 month after he arrived, the letter came. Mr. Harrison called him into his office. He looked serious, almost worried. He handed Daniel an envelope made of thick, expensive paper with an embossed logo, a mountain peak with the words, "Summit Ridge Development." Their offer was now $30,000. But that wasn't all. The letter said if Daniel refused to sell, they were prepared to petition the county to seize the land through eminent domain. They claimed his unimproved structure was a blight on the area and blocked their utility access. It was a threat wrapped in legal language. They were trying to scare him into selling. "They're getting aggressive," Mr. Harrison said, watching Daniel's face. "They've been buying up all the land around yours. You're the last holdout." A year ago, the kid standing on those group home steps would have been terrified. He would have taken the money and run. But the person sitting in that office wasn't that kid anymore. He'd spent a month hauling water and chopping wood. He'd built a fire that warmed a home. He'd made something real with his own hands. "My grandfather wrote something in his journal," Daniel said, pushing their letter aside. "He said the foundation was everything." "What did he mean?" Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know for certain. But William was a master carpenter and stonemason. He worked on dam projects all over this state. He understood geology, how to read land. If he said the foundation was important, he meant it literally." Daniel went back to the hut with those words circling in his mind. The foundation. The concrete floor. He spent the next day on his hands and knees, examining every inch of it. He swept away years of dust and dirt, running his hands over the rough surface, looking for something. Anything. In the far back corner, hidden partially behind where he'd set up the wood stove, he found it. A line. A perfectly straight, deliberate line cut into the concrete, forming a large square about 4 feet by 4 feet. It wasn't a crack. It was a seam. A door. His heart pounded so hard you could practically hear it. He spent an hour trying to figure out how to open it. There were no handles, no obvious way to lift it. Finally, he realized it worked on a counterweight system. He used a long piece of timber as a lever, pressing down on one edge. With a low grinding sound of stone on stone, the massive slab tilted up, revealing a dark square opening in the ground. A ladder made of iron rebar led down into blackness. The air rising up smelled like cold stone and deep earth. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and climbed down. The cellar was small and dry, the walls made of perfectly fitted stone, his grandfather's work, anyone could tell. And in the center, on a stone pedestal, was a heavy metal lockbox. Next to it was another letter, sealed in a glass jar to protect it from moisture. His hands shook as he opened the jar and unfolded the paper. Daniel. If you found this, you were paying attention. Good man. I built this hut on this exact spot for a reason. Not just to hide the money, not just to give you shelter. I built it here for what's underneath. He read faster, his breath caught in his chest. When I was a young man, I worked on a geological survey for the state. We mapped this whole region. Most of it is just rock and clay. Nothing special. But there's something else here. Deep underground, there's an aquifer, a massive reserve of pure spring water. The survey was classified, buried by the state to prevent a water rush. But I never forgot where it was. This land sits directly on top of it. You don't just own 3 acres of land, son. You own the water underneath it. All of it. Daniel sat down hard on the stone floor, the letter shaking in his hands. Water. The developers weren't building a resort without water. They couldn't. They weren't after his worthless piece of land. They were after what was underneath it. And they were trying to steal it for $30,000. The lockbox contained everything. Copies of William Carter's original geological surveys, water table maps, and a legal opinion from a water rights specialist confirming that the owner of this land controlled the aquifer beneath it. He'd been planning this for 35 years. He'd built a fortress to protect his grandchildren's future. The anger hit Daniel first, hot and white and furious. These people had looked at him and seen an easy mark. Some orphan kid they could push around. They'd underestimated him. They'd underestimated his grandfather. He went back to Mr. Harrison the next day and spread everything from the lockbox across his desk. The lawyer read through it all, his eyes getting wider with each page. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, and then he smiled, really smiled, for the first time since Daniel had met him. "William, you brilliant man," he whispered to himself. Then he looked at Daniel. "Son, this changes everything. You're not just defending yourself anymore. You have leverage. Real leverage. We can set our own terms." The next 3 months were intense. Mr. Harrison hired a water rights lawyer from Portland. Daniel learned about riparian rights, commercial extraction permits, legal terms he'd never heard before. Summit Ridge Development tried to bury them in paperwork, tried to challenge William's survey, but his work was perfect. Their whole strategy collapsed. During all of this, Daniel kept working on the hut. The legal battle felt distant, abstract. The physical work kept him sane. He bought a small generator for power. He taught himself carpentry from books and YouTube videos. Frank from the hardware store became his mentor, letting him use his workshop, giving him advice. Daniel framed out rooms, a small bedroom for himself, a bigger one for Bella. He built a kitchen area, a bathroom space. He found old wooden planks from a collapsed barn and sanded them into smooth, warm flooring. The Quonset hut was transforming. It was becoming a home. People in town started to notice. They'd heard the rumors, the kid fixing up the old Carter place, developers trying to push him out. Small towns have their own way of choosing sides. A retired electrician showed him how to wire things safely. A woman dropped off a box of kitchen supplies. Frank let him buy materials on credit when he was low on cash. They weren't just being kind. They were standing with him. The turning point came when Summit Ridge realized Daniel wasn't backing down. They requested a meeting. Two men in expensive suits showed up at Mr. Harrison's office. They tried to be charming, talked about partnership and community. Daniel just listened. Finally, their lawyer slid a new offer across the table. $250,000. $250,000. A year ago, that number would have been unimaginable. It was enough to disappear, to start over anywhere. Mr. Harrison looked at Daniel. He'd told him this was his choice, that he'd support him either way. You could see Daniel thinking. Thinking about that money. Thinking about how easy it would be. But then he thought about splitting wood on cold mornings. He thought about the pride he felt looking at the walls he'd built with his own hands. He thought about his grandfather and the 35-year plan William had executed perfectly. And he thought about Bella and the promise he'd made her. A real home. No, Daniel said. The suit stared at him like he'd lost his mind. The answer is no. I'm not selling the land or the water rights. He pushed their counterproposal across the desk, the one he and Mr. Harrison had prepared. But I will lease you utility access. You can run your pipes across a corner of my land. In exchange, you'll pay an annual fee. You'll fund and install a commercial well and pump system on my property, which I'll own. You'll connect my home to the power grid at your expense. And you'll establish a community water trust to ensure local residents have priority access to water at fair rates. Forever. The men were speechless. They saw an 18-year-old kid in a flannel shirt and work boots dictating terms to their million-dollar corporation. They left without answering, but 3 weeks later, they agreed. To everything. The day those contracts were signed, Daniel didn't feel triumphant. He just felt quiet. He walked back to his land, to his home. The power company had come the day before. He flipped the switch by the door, and for the first time, the entire space flooded with clean, bright, steady light. It was real. It was home. That summer, Daniel went to court for Bella. He didn't go alone. Mr. Harrison came. Frank came. A dozen people from town came. Daniel wasn't just some aged-out foster kid anymore. He was a landowner. He had a home, stable income, a community. The judge looked at his file, at the letters of support, at pictures of the home Daniel had built. He looked at Bella, sitting there brave and small in her best dress. He granted the petition for guardianship. Walking out of that courthouse with Bella's hand in his, that was the real victory. That was the only one that mattered. They drove home, back to the mountains, back to the Quonset hut. When Bella saw it, her eyes went wide. It had new windows, a real door, a small porch Daniel had just finished. Smoke curled from the chimney. It looked warm and solid and real. You did it, Danny, she whispered. You built us a house. It's not exactly a house, Bells, he said, smiling. It's a Quonset hut. No, she said, squeezing his hand tight. It's home. They stand on that porch now sometimes and look out at the forest. The world is quiet there. They have everything they need. William Carter's gift wasn't the money. It was the chance to build something instead of just surviving. It was a difficult choice and the faith that his grandson was strong enough to make it. He taught Daniel that the most valuable things are hidden, buried under rust and neglect. He taught him that home isn't something you find, it's something you build with your own hands. And sometimes the greatest act of love is leaving someone a puzzle you know they're strong enough to solve. This journey, from those cold steps to that warm porch, has been about finding a foundation. And the lesson here? Your foundation is yours to build. It doesn't matter what you start with. You have the capacity to build a life of meaning. It will be hard. You'll want to quit. But every nail you hammer makes you stronger. If this story meant something to you, join our community. And tell us in the comments about a time you chose the harder path. Your stories matter. They're part of this home we're all building together.